Hello, welcome to today's edition of Pegasus Test. On today's edition, we're doing a review of the iconic AR-180. If you were like me and a child of the 1980s, getting into the gun culture when you were in your teens, then this is the definition of iconic for you. You first saw this movie in the Terminator, when Arnold Schwarzenegger went into the police station with this in his SPAS 12 and blew the place apart. And like me, you wondered, what the heck is that? What the heck is that was an AR-180. In the film, it was an AR-18. The AR-180 is a semi-automatic version. Well, what is an AR-18? It's an interesting thing. It was designed by Eugene Stoner, the same man who brought us the M16. Mr. Stoner had invented the AR-15 at Armalite, passed the rights off the Colt, and all the patents too. So they come along with this idea to make a rifle that can be produced in lesser developed nations, nations that didn't have the technology to make an AR-15. So with that parameter in mind, and the weird parameter of he has to invent a rifle using an operating system that doesn't have anything that violates the patents that he has on the M16, because the M16 is now owned by Colt, including the patents. Imagine that, going to work one day and having to figure a way around your own work. What he did, though, was pretty simple. He made a gun full of stampings for the most part. Not a lot of AR-180s were made. They were made in three places. They were made in Costa Mesa, California, where this gun was made. They were made by Hoa over in Japan. And last, they were made by Sterling over in the UK before they finally went out of production. You don't find a lot of AR-180s out there. If you do find them, they're on Gunbroker. Their prices are $1,500 and north of that. And the $1,500 guns, quite frankly, are pretty well used and pretty ragged out. The higher the price means the better condition it's in. This one is in excellent condition and it commanded a good price. This is owned by a friend of mine, not actually my gun. They decided to let me have a look at it so I could bring this classic icon to you. One thing, let's get out of the way really quick about this rifle. It looks like it uses AR-15 magazines, but in fact it does not. You're looking at it right now and that looks like an AR-15 20-round magazine, but it's not. When I activate the magazine release and pull it out, the first thing you notice is that the magazine catch hole is in a different place. If I flip the magazine over, there's not the traditional catch on the left side that there would be with an AR-15 magazine. All AR-180 magazines are on the right side and have this very small cut for it to be engaged with the magazine release on the rifle. Also, you'd be forgiven for thinking that, hey, look, it's on the right side of the rifle instead of the left, so it must be ambidextrous. Well, hate to break the news to you, there's nothing on the other side of that rifle to release a magazine. But you know what? That's not a bad thing. This rifle is what you got in the beginning, in the 80s, in the 70s. You wanted a 5.56 caliber military rifle. It was this, the Mini 14, and the AR-15. AR-15s were ridiculously priced in comparison to these rifles. It's not like today. Today we can get AR-15s with all the bells and whistles for about $500. It wasn't like this back in the day. You generally paid about twice as much for an AR-15 as you did for an AR-180 or a Mini 14. So these rifles were the go-to rifle in their day. There are many features of this rifle that put it ahead of its time, but here's some throwback stuff that does not do that, and that's the sling swivels. They're right here and right here. They're conventional sling swivels mounted in a conventional place, designed to carry a conventional sling. Got to remember, when this rifle was invented in the late 1960s, put in production in the 1970s, there was no one out there with the idea of the Viking Tactics sling, or the three-point sling, or the single-point sling. So this is an attempt to give it sling swivels that work in a traditional manner. You will notice the rear sling swivel here is mounted at the heel of the pistol grip, and there's a special reason for that. That's because every single AR-180 ever has a folding stock. Let's look at that in detail. All AR-180s come with a folding stock. That's pretty unique. That's unique for the time this rifle came out. That's pretty much unique for today, if you think about it. And these stocks are rock solid. They're in their place They don't wiggle, they don't move, which is not something common with folding stocks. Matter of fact, the only folding stock on the market I can think of that's rock solid when you have it in place is the Zukov stock. That's from Magpul that goes in a lot of AKs. You fold that stock into place, it's rock solid as if it was a fixed stock. This is the same way. My folding FALs and Galil stocks, not as solid as this thing is. And the mounting system is simplistic. I should say the folding mechanism is simplistic. You have a hinge right here. Right here you have two detents. Push the detents in and the stock folds, like so, and then locks it to the side so it doesn't just flop open when you have it, and then the rifle becomes a very compact rifle that you can shoot. Now if I wanted to, I could fire this weapon one-handed. At 8 pounds, it's a little heavy to hold out there. If I was big as Arnold Schwarzenegger, I probably could have done the things he did in the Terminator. Now I wish I hadn't worn a black shirt today because all this black gun is blending in with the black shirt, so I hope this comes out okay. However, you can see I have the stock folded now on the AR-180, and it's a very easily deployable stock. Grab a hold, pull back, and flip it into place. I did that a little violently, but that shows you how easy it goes. Now we're going to take this opportunity to do a little close-up shot, and you see this little pin right here. That's to keep the stock closed in its travel configuration, and it mates up to this socket right here on the stock. So when you fold, it comes around, and as you can see, the pin goes into the socket. And then there you have a compact folded rifle. Another thing about this rifle that's really cool is this was ambidextrous when being ambidextrous wasn't cool. Let's look at some of those ambidextrous features. The first one is something everybody's doing to their ARs right now, which is putting an ambidextrous safety on it. But there's one on this rifle already. You can see I'm manipulating it from the other side of the rifle, and it works both ways. Now I'm having a little trouble manipulating it because, well, guess what? I'm not a left-hander. But, as you can see, it's there and it works. Another feature of this rifle that made it ambidextrous was its charging handle. Now the AR-15 has always been ambidextrous from the beginning. The charging handle's right back here, and you can pull it with your right, you can pull it with your left. Naturally ambidextrous. As normally the case with a gun that has the charging handle mounted on the right side of the bolt like this one does, it's a right-handed only gun. However, in this case, that's not true. I come over my right hand, pull it back, and let it go. And I could do that with it mounted in my shoulder, but my hand would interfere with the dust cover here on camera, so that's the reason I did it the way I just did. Now, let's go ahead and put the dust cover in place. I need to charge the rifle with my left hand. Reach over the gun, and I can charge it. So, this bent charging handle, by default, makes it ambidextrous.
The sights on the AR-180 are exactly what you would expect of a gun invented in the 1960s, produced in the 1970s. We have a front sight post protected with a set of ears, and we have a rear sight drum that has an aperture sight that's adjustable for windage. The gun, on this gun, all elevation adjustments are done at the front of the gun. All windage is done at the rear. Now this represents a unique transition in the history of 5.56 rifles in and of the fact that on an M16A1 you adjust windage and elevation the exact same way. You adjust the elevation on the front sight, you adjust the windage on the rear sight. Now on the AR-15 M16A1, to adjust said windage on the rear, you had to use the tip of a bullet. Doesn't work that way with the AR-180. Here on the AR-180 is where things get different. You have a 200 meter aperture and a 400 meter aperture. To make a windage adjustment, right or left, you turn this knob right here. And it indicates that turning it right makes it goes right, opposite makes it go left. This is an improvement over the M16A1 and the fact that you don't need a tool or a bullet tip or anything like that to make an adjustment. On the other hand, it's nowhere as refined as the M16A2, which is easy to turn, and on the rear sight you can make adjustments to both windage and elevation as necessary.
Here's where we get into a part of the AR-180 that was ahead of its time. Remember, I've said several times, we're dealing with a rifle that was invented in the 1960s and produced in the 1970s, you know, essentially 50 years ago at this point. And right here you have an integral scope base. Doesn't look like much of one, but that's exactly what it is. So they were thinking about optics that far back. Now in the modern day, optics have become nearly essential on our rifles. I mean, we'd almost consider them essential as a magazine release and a safety lever in some respects. But back then, that wasn't the case. And the fact that they built a rifle from the get-go that came ready for a scope is just amazing. Considering back late 60s, early 70s, there really wasn't a red dot sight. Aimpoint was just coming out with their first models. The main type of red dot sight that you had was an Armson OEG type sight. And you know, that wasn't that great. They had a small 4X, I believe it was, sight for this. And you know, that was just amazing at the time. Today, of course, if this rifle was in production, there'd be a Picatinny rail up there because, of course, every rifle comes with a Picatinny rail because everybody assumes you're going to throw an optic on it. This was optics friendly before optics friendly was a thing. Here's an extreme close-up side view of the optics rail here on the 180. You got to remember, this was pre-Picatinny rail. No, there was no 1913 standard. So Armalite was just making this one up as they went along. And while the system was used uniquely to the AR-180 and no one else picked up on it, you got to admit, they were thinking ahead of the time. And if we didn't have this, we probably wouldn't have the 1913 rail today. The AR-180 rifle. This rifle is definitely iconic, and it's had an influence on firearms development few other guns have ever had. Which is kind of unique in the respect that these are not plentifully out there on the market. I think production was well under 5,000 units. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was never adopted by a major military in the AR-18 form. Very few police forces operated it. The civilian market sales went through 3 different manufacturers: Costa Rica in California, Hoa in Japan, and Sterling in the UK. Lots of these guns are out there available for sale, but there's not a large pool of them, say, as compared to AR-15s or Mini 14s. The operating system of the AR-18 is what endures. I haven't broken this gun open in this video, and I don't intend to. This is an overview. This is not an in-depth review. If you're looking for something like that, head on over to Forgotten Weapons or Military Arms channel. They've done great reviews on these rifles, and they dig deep into the guts of them. What makes this rifle have an impact on firearms development is its operating system. The operating system has been used in many rifles. The British SA-80 L85 series, for example. It's used in the Australian Leader T5, which is a pretty obscure gun, but one you do encounter on the market. A lot of guns base what they do on it. The Armalite Ar is another one that comes to mind. So while the gun itself isn't there, the operating system that came out of it is used in many firearms. We didn't do any firing of the AR-180 in this video, and that's because the owner of this rifle doesn't want to reduce its value. This rifle possibly has never been fired from the looks of it. If it has been fired, it's only been a very few rounds. There's a little surface rust on some of the metal parts that can be easily removed from improper storage by a previous owner. It looks like this rifle was bought and forgotten about, to be honest. The AR-180, if you can find one today at a reasonable price, is a good gun. If I have the opportunity to get one of these at a reasonable price, I'm going to jump on it. I've done some research about magazines. Apparently you can modify AR-15 metal magazines to go in there. Apparently it's a hit or miss proposition because you got to make your cuts just right for it all to work and everything to line up properly. But with the price of magazines today, it's kind of a worthwhile risk. I think this is still a viable rifle. Yes, the mounting system for optics are not compatible with modern systems, and as far as I can tell, there are no adapters out there. So it may be worth getting one of the vintage period scopes for it, which I understand work just fine. This rifle is very cool. Its development led to the development of the SA-80, the Steyr AUG, the Leader T5, and too many other guns, numerous to list. In effect, it's the first chassis system firearm, because your body is all stampings and the gun runs on a chassis of 2 guide rods and springs inside, or excuse me, the bolt runs on 2 guide rods and a spring on the inside. A lot of firearms follow that, and a lot of gas piston guns are basically AR-18s. We hope you found this review of the AR-180 helpful and informative. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and tune in for future reviews of iconic firearms.